Welcome everyone to the final session of SBCN's Activate Your Impact Nonprofit Policy Summit. I think all of you are sick of me, but my name is Dana Elneal. I'm SBCN's Learning and Member Engagement Director, and I'm really excited to have you all here for our last session, Palace Intrigue, Upcoming Races and Their Implications for Nonprofits. Before we invite our speakers up, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that each of us are on today. Here in San Jose, California, we are living, learning, and organizing on the lands of the Muwekma and Tamiya and Ohlone tribes. Together, let us commit to educating ourselves and advocating for Indigenous peoples, both here and globally. We know folks are tuning in from different areas, so please do learn which land you're on by using the link that we're going to share in the chat, and share that in your introductions, where we'd love to hear from you on your name, your title, organization, pronouns, and your native land. We encourage folks to share AYI on social media by using the hashtags AYI22, Activate Your Impact, and Driving Fearless Advocacy, and feel free to tag SBCN and our speakers wherever you post. For accessibility purposes, we have automated closed captioning feature enabled in Zoom. You're able to both show or hide the feature and move around the captions wherever on your screen is most convenient for you. Feel free to direct message me if you're having any tech challenges throughout the session. Thank you so much to our sponsors, First Five of Santa Clara County, the San Francisco Foundation, Destination Home, Stanford Children's Health, El Camino Health, Santa Clara Family Health Plan, Kaiser Permanente, and Healthier Kids Foundation for making this event possible. We ask that folks use the chat function to send your questions throughout the presentation, and our panelists will do their best to get to them if we have time. We do ask that folks remain on mute for the duration of the program. A reminder that this meeting is being recorded for registrants who couldn't make it or who want to rewatch this later, and we'll be sending that out in a follow-up email to all the registrants. And with that, let's dive in and welcome our speakers. You can find their full bios on our AYI website, but I'd like to bring up Terry Christensen, host of Valley Politics, and Poncho Guevara, Executive Director of Sacred Heart Community Service. Poncho, Terry, take it away.
Thank you very much, and we'll welcome everybody. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk fast and talk about a lot of candidates and issues. So please use the chat function for questions that we can get back to one way or another. We're going to give you an overview of what's going on in the City Hall and County Hall, the palaces of local government, as quickly as we can. Starting with, next slide, please, big changes coming for the San Jose City Council. These are changes that could shift the balance on the council to left or right, or maybe further entrench a center. Next slide. In 2020, the balance on the council was Mayor Liccardo leading a 6-vote moderate to conservative business-friendly caucus versus a 5-vote labor-friendly progressive, or sometimes called equity caucus, because of their emphasis on equity issues. Next slide, please. So these folks split votes on a variety of issues: rent control, downtown development fees, charter reform, and others. Next slide. Now we have come to the 2020 election, or sorry, the 2022 election, and the names in red are either open seats or, in one case, a candidate up for re-election. So right now, subsequent to the 2020 election, the list on the right is the Progressive or Equity Caucus with 6 votes. The list on the left is the Mayor's Caucus, more moderate caucus, more business friendly. So you can see there are 5 possible changes. Only one of these is an incumbent running for re-election. That's Maya Esparza in District 7. We'll get to the specifics of the districts in a few minutes. The other 3 council members and the mayor are termed out. So those are open seats. Well, you can see the balance could easily shift one way or the other, depending on the outcome of these elections. Before I go any further, I want to emphasize that they don't split this way on every single vote. The vast majority of votes are unanimous. A lot of others are 8-3 or 9-2 or 10-1. So there can be shifting. Pam Foley might join the Progressive Caucus on a vote. David Cohen might join the Mayor's Caucus on a vote. So this isn't a rigid division, but on a lot of key issues, especially for issues that relate to your constituencies, this split comes up. So let's go to the next slide. And this is a quick list of some of the issues that are coming up already and or will come up in the city and mayor's election. The, the big group on the left, housing, SB 9, displacement, homelessness, trash, all kind of meld together in the issue of our housing crisis and adequate access to housing for people of all income levels. SB 9 is one that's already come up in the mayor's race. That's a statewide it's a state law that went into effect in January that allows duplexes or fourplexes on properties zoned for single family dwelling units. And over 90% of the residential property in San Jose is zoned for single family dwellings. This could increase density in a variety of neighborhoods across the city. There's big blowback on this from some neighborhoods, including mine, Negley Park. But housing advocates and others are emphasizing that this is one way to increase the housing supply at relatively modest cost, let people do something with their own property, their single family dwelling units turned into a duplex or a fourplex. And it's also a way to get other cities to carry some of the burden of housing. San Jose has carried much more of the burden of housing in this region than other cities that have been much more resistant to housing, especially affordable housing. Homelessness, trash, those are things I know you're hearing about, the candidates are hearing about. We're reading about them on neighborhood listservs and so on. And the candidates, there are candidates already using these and SB 9 as wedge issues, kind of demagoguing on them. And I would listen carefully if I were you to what the candidates say about homelessness, because a lot of what they're saying is simplistic. A lot of it has been tried, and I'm not sure they're coming up with practical changes that could really address the problem. But we all share that concern. Poncho, you want to weigh in on this range of issues a little bit?
Yeah, I think what I was just going to share. Thanks, Terry, and that's a great introduction, because what we're looking at right now is the way that these issues are being framed by the candidates, and I'm sure they're doing plenty of polling to actually see where the temperature is of folks that are motivated, maybe angry or upset by different conditions that are happening in their community. They're using it as a wedge issue, and the stakes couldn't really be higher for a lot of the communities that nonprofits are serving. Talking about, there's been literal attacks by candidates for office at the city and the county level, leveled at organizations that are actually working to resolve and work on some of these issues and crises around housing and homelessness. It's become almost like housing is not the proactive, we're going to try to make something happen right now. It's the wedge issue to say, well, we want housing, but not for people that aren't like us. And that's been thrown out there by a number of candidates, and certainly it must be gaining some traction, because it's been part of the conversation from a number of candidates for office. The other thing to actually note too is that there are other issues that are of deep concern around what's happening with changes potentially for public safety, which continues to be on the radar screen, and what was definitely one of the hot topics that was used as a wedge issue in campaigns just 2 years ago, and certainly is going to continue to be something that is going to continue to be a part of a focus. There's also appears to be some blowback on issues, things that have come up as part of charter amendment changes, that including things related to public safety, but also talking about the opportunity to expand voting rights to non-citizens in San Jose. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But all these things have deep implications for us, for city services, where resources are going, the allocation of time and energy by our elected leaders on these particular issues, and the facile solutions are ones that we have to be very, very wary of, because they're going to start attacking our ability to be able to push for changes that are representing where our communities and constituencies are going. So next slide. You're on mute, Terry.
Just before we get into the mayor's race, just one more word about the issues, and that is the issue of equity kind of wraps up all of these issues. And the council, the equity caucus, or the progressive caucus on the council, has been talking about these issues for a while, the Charter Revision Commission tried to frame the charter changes in the context of equity. And that means equity among the districts, equity among neighborhoods, equity among demographic groups in the city. And some have been served better than others. So that's what equity is all about. Now the next slide, we go to the mayor's race. We'll get into some specific candidates. First, I want to mention that I interviewed these 4 candidates for the January episode of Valley Politics. It's a 1-hour episode, 15 minutes each, talked about several of the issues that we just listed. So I suggest you check that out, Valley Politics on Create TV. It's on YouTube and it's on Facebook. And these are the 4 major contenders in the race. The top 2 fundraisers are Cindy Chavez and Matt Mahan. They have each raised about $500,000. They each raised about $500,000 just in December. We're waiting for the next report. Raul Perales raised about half that much. Dev Davis raised about a third that much. So she's lagging behind in the fundraising. You know, the 3 of these people are council members: Matt Mahan from the Albadan Valley, Dev Davis from Willow Glen, Raul Perales from the downtown central San Jose district. Cindy Chavez was the district council member for downtown San Jose at one time, but she's been on the County Board of Supervisors representing that area and the east side for quite some time. On the political perspective, Chavez and Perales would be on the more progressive side or more equity candidates. Mahan and Davis are more conservative, particularly Dev Davis, a former Republican, although she left the party a few years ago. But they would be the more moderate to business friendly candidates, whereas Chavez and Perales will be the more labor and equity friendly candidates. There are significant differences among these candidates on SB 9. Only Perales forthrightly supports SB 9. On housing in general, on homelessness, on voting for non-citizens, Dev Davis voted against even studying voting for non-citizens. So you'll want to check out their positions on the issues carefully. Mahan's been endorsed by the Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee. So is Davis, a dual endorsement. Davis is endorsed by former conservative mayor Chuck Reed. Mahan is very likely, we expect Mahan to be endorsed by our current mayor, Sam Liccardo, but it hasn't happened yet. Perales and Chavez are fighting for the Labor and Democratic Party endorsement. It's going to be really important for either or both of them to be competitive in the race, both for money, but even more for volunteers. Labor and Democratic Party are a huge source of volunteers for candidates. These are not, however, the only candidates. So next slide, please. There are 3 other candidates. They haven't raised significant funds. They don't all have websites, but they are running, and you'll hear from them and you'll see them at some candidate forums. So just be aware that it's more than the big 4, although the big 4 have the money to compete strongly across the board. So to put the mayor's race in context, let's look at the next slide, which is the citizen voting age population in San Jose. So you can see the largest group is white folks at 37%, and then Asian, and of course, Asian Americans are very diverse in their own category at 34%, and Latinos at 25%, relatively small. Black population of 3.4%. These are voters. The numbers are different in the total population. So Latinos are a little bit underrepresented in voters. Asians are a little bit underrepresented in voters. Whites are overrepresented. The white population is overrepresented in voters. But that can be an important division in the city, and these candidates are going to appeal to these groups in different ways. Mahan and Davis, especially to the white voters, Perales and Chavez, especially to the Latino voters. I think the voter demographic that's most in play is Asian voters. And again, as I said, that's a very diverse group in itself. I think Cindy Chavez is probably best placed to appeal to Vietnamese voters as a member of the County Board of Supervisors. She worked really hard on establishing a Vietnamese community center and other programs relating to that particular demographic. So demographics, race is going to play a part in the outcome of the election. Next slide. This is the 2014 mayor's race, and this divided the city by east and west. So the east, the blue areas, those are precincts that David Cortese won. They're the precincts with the highest populations of Latino voters and Asian voters. The green, the dark green, those are precincts that Sam Liccardo won. Those are precincts with the highest white population. So it's very likely that we're going to see significant racial division in this race. The outcome could be different because the demographic groups that have grown are Asian and Latino voters, while the white demographic and white voter population has shrunk a little bit. But it will depend significantly on who actually turns out to vote. Voter turnout, always crucial. Which brings us to City Council and the council races. And if we go to the next slide, Poncho is going to talk about redistricting before we go into the specific district races. Poncho?
Thanks, Terry. One of the things that's really important to note is that the demographics are going to play a big difference, and they played a big difference in terms of where the decennial effort to actually work on redistricting played a huge part in thinking about what does the future look like. And obviously, when you have elected officials that get to choose what the districts look like or how they're made up, there was a lot of community input. There was a commission that was established to be able to create a bunch of lines. Largely, a lot of that work was ignored by the council, which is not uncommon for it to take place. And ultimately, the San Jose City Council voted 7-4 to adopt a map that was originally proposed by Councilmember David Cohn with some changes or adjustments that were made. And you had some council members like voting in a variety of different ways around it. Ultimately, it redrew districts 2 and 10 pretty significantly, but preserved a lot of the existing lines for 5, 7, and 8 on the east side. So there was one of the challenges that happened in that process. There were efforts on the part of some organizations, including organized labor, to actually help advance certain ideas or maps. They had a number of their allies being able to work on it, and there were efforts that were being made to try to adjust those boundaries. And ultimately, what was really inspiring to actually see is the fact that there were folks from organizations that were looking at it through a racial justice lens, trying to make sure that we were preserving and perhaps even strengthening the voting power of Asian American voters, even to the detriment of certain kinds of neighborhoods or communities, and saying we want to make sure that we're actually doing that. So a coalition of organizations like the Vietnamese American Roundtable, the CSIP Weather Collective, the Black Leadership Kitchen Cabinet came together to say, hey, no, we don't want people messing around with these things, because we know that there need to be, and it is a glaring omission that we do not have any Asian American political figures on the city council right now. And so that was one of the things that there was a lot of excitement around. But ultimately, when we get down to it, it comes down to having good candidates that have the experience and relationships and community to actually get things to the other side. So excited to talk about what you're seeing right now, Terry, with these council races.
Okay, let's get into the specific council races, starting with, next slide, Council District 1. That's West San Jose, so that's kind of from Valley Fair and Santana Row on west to Cupertino. 3 major candidates at this point. I should say that filing on these races doesn't close till March 11th, so we could see additional candidates. I sort of doubt it, because people started fundraising in December. And if you're not getting started on fundraising until mid-March, you're already well behind. So these are the 3 candidates we have right now in the District 1 race. The asterisks designate the top fundraisers. They've each raised about $25,000, not bad for a city council race. You probably need to raise about $150,000 total to really do a competitive city council campaign. So they've got a decent start, Justin Lardinois and Ramona Snyder. Justin is a planning commissioner, so he's got some practical experience. Ramona has worked for the Downtown Foundation, so she's got some local experience as well. Ramona's been endorsed by the Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee. So that gives you a hint that she's going to be the more conservative candidate in that race. The latest entrant, and we don't have fundraising figures for her because she only just announced, I think, well, actually earlier this week, is Rosemary Kamei. And she'll be a major contender, even though she's the latest to enter. She's worked for nonprofits for a long time, the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, for example. She was an elected water district director, and she is currently an elected trustee on the County Board of Education. So considerable electoral experience, wide network of contacts, endorsed by Chappie Jones, the incumbent council member from that district, who's popular in the district, Evan Lowe, the assembly member who represents that area. And I think it's likely that she'll get Labor and Democratic Party endorsements, although Luddenwall will be competing with her for those endorsements. And those endorsements, as I've said earlier, count significantly, both in terms of money that especially Labor will put into races, including independent expenditures, but even more significantly in terms of volunteers and hundreds and even thousands of volunteer hours on phone banks or text banks or walking precincts when we're safe to do that. The district, the demographics of the district, 49% white, 34% Asian, 14% Latino, 4% Black. So a wider district than some, at least, including the next one we'll talk about. So next slide, Council District 3. That's Central and Downtown San Jose. We have a lot of candidates. This is my district. We have a lot of candidates, 7 in all. Joanna Rao on the top right there hasn't announced yet, as far as I know, but her name's out there. All the others have announced, and this will be a very competitive race. I think the top 3 contenders probably are Irene Smith, Omar Torres, and Elizabeth Chen Hale. Elizabeth Chen Hale is president of the Downtown Residents Association, which is a very active group of folks who live mostly in the high rises around downtown. So she's got a pretty good network of connections. She's an attorney. She has raised $12,000, not a huge amount, it's a start. Irene Smith is a neighbor of mine in Nagley Park. She is an attorney. She's done counseling. She has a PhD in psychology. She's done mental health work. She has done some formidable fundraising, $60,000. So she's actually the top fundraiser in that district, and the second top one of any council candidate in the city. She's endorsed by the Silicon Valley Business Chamber of Commerce. Again, that gives you the hint that she's going to be the conservative candidate in that race. Omar Torres has worked for nonprofits. He was on Magdalena Carrasco's staff for I think almost 6 years. He worked for the Strong Neighbors Initiative projects in Central San Jose. I worked with him on some of those projects. He was an elected school board member, Franklin McKinley, and he's currently an elected member of the San Jose Evergreen Community College trustees. I think Omar is the likely Labor and Democratic Party endorsement. My guess is the top 2 candidates here are Irene Smith and Omar Torres, but we'll see how the others do. Only Irene Smith and Elizabeth Chen Hale raised money in December, so it remains to be seen how competitive the others will be, but I'm pretty confident Omar Torres will be among the top competitors. This district, District 3, is 37% Latino, 33% white, 25% Asian, and 6% Black. So you really have to be able to appeal to the Latino and Asian votes to win. If you really appeal heavily to the white vote, that can get you into the runoff, but it can be hard to get to 50% you can't do it with just the white vote. You got to appeal across ethnic and racial boundaries, as do all of the candidates. So we'll see how that one plays out. And now we're ready for the next slide, District 5. District 5 is the east side, Alum Rock. Mayfair, Plata Arroyo, those neighborhoods, running east to the foothills. It's the most heavily Latino district. It's 37%, I'm sorry, it's 47% Latino, 30% Asian, 13% white, 3% Black. So it may be not too surprising that there are 4 Latino candidates. The 5th, H.G. Nguyen, is Vietnamese. H.G., she and her husband formed the Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, and she hosts a radio program in Vietnamese language. She's very well known in the Vietnamese community. That can give her a significant core of support. Hasn't done much fundraising as yet. This, as I said, is probably going to be the most competitive race. These 5, and particularly the 4 Latinos in the race, are all pretty well known, pretty established in their communities, and have some fundraising chops. The top fundraiser of all the city candidates in all the districts is Rolando Bonilla. Rolando is a political consultant. He currently is the chair of the City Planning Commission, so some pretty direct experience. He's endorsed by Ron Gonzalez and the Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee. I don't think that's going to make him a particularly conservative candidate, but the most business-friendly candidate in this group. The other candidates are going to be hustling to get the labor endorsement, and they'll be presumably more liberal on at least some issues. Nora Campos is Nora Campos and Peter Ortiz have each raised about $43,000. So that's pretty significant. It's only half of what Rolando's raised, but it is significant. Nora, you'll remember, is a former council member, and then she was in the state assembly. She lost an election to Jim Bell, who won the state Senate seat against her, and then she's been out of politics for a while, still active in the community in a variety of ways. She's endorsed by Democratic Activists for Women Now. She'll be endorsed by leaders of that community. I'm sure she'll be a formidable campaigner. Andres Quintero is a trustee for the Alum Rock School District. He's run for office before. He's pretty well established in the community, especially the Alum Rock School District. And he raised $41,000 in December. So cumulative, the candidates in this race have raised more money than any of the other districts. So it's going to be a very competitive race. Peter Ortiz, I should have mentioned, again, $43,000 raised, a significant amount. Peter's an elected member of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, so he's had some electoral experience. He's been an activist with small businesses in the Alum Rock area for some time. So they all have roots. They've all raised enough money to be credible candidates, except H.G. Nguyen, and we just haven't seen her fundraising capacity yet. So that'll be a significant race. I think the big thing to watch here is who Labor endorses. Will they do a sole endorsement? And if so, who will it be? A lot of people are betting on Nora Campos. Same for the Democratic Party. Again, will it be a sole endorsement because there are a bunch of Democrats here? And if so, we'll see whether it's a sole endorsement and whether they can throw all their weight behind it. Remember, this is the most Latino district, and it does show in the candidates who are running. Next slide. Now we're up to District 7. This is South San Jose. This district is 49% Asian, 34% Latino, and 15% white, 2% Black. So it's the most Asian of all the districts involved in the election this year. District 4 Berryessa has an even bigger Asian population, but 49%. The incumbent is Maya Esparza. Maya worked for the United Way before she was on the council. She served her first term, running now for her second term. She raised $14,000 in December. That's not very significant for an incumbent. She's going to need to do a lot better than that to be competitive in this race. She has significant endorsements, including the Firefighters Union, Councilmember Chappie Jones from the West Valley, Democratic Activists for women now. I think she's likely, very likely, to be the Labor candidate and to be the Democratic Party candidate. So she'll have some strength. Maya's worked hard on district services in her time in office. If you follow her online, you'll see a lot of very specific projects and organizing efforts that she's brought to the district. So she'll be a strong candidate, but she is being strongly challenged by two Vietnamese candidates in a district that, again, is 49% Asian. Bien Dom is a firefighter himself, although the firefighters union, as I mentioned, have endorsed Maya Esparza. He raised $35,000 in December, so that's formidable, especially for a new and emerging candidate. He has the endorsement of the Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee, so that signals he's the business candidate in the district, which can be a great source of funds for him, although it's a very liberal district, a very progressive district, so we'll see how that plays out with the actual voters. Van Ley is an elected trustee of the Eastside Union High School District. She's run before in this district and, of course, for the high school district trustee. She's a pretty formidable fundraiser, $71 million raised in December. So that puts her right there as a credible candidate. This will be a really tight race. I'm pretty confident Maya Esparza gets to the runoff because the Vietnamese candidates are likely to split that vote. But she needs 50% to win without going to a runoff, and it will be more of a challenge for her to get up to that 50% to build on her Latino constituency, white voters, and also to pick up Vietnamese supporters. However, she defeated a Vietnamese candidate. You may remember Tam Nguyen from Council District 7. He was an incumbent. She defeated him in the last elections, and she had a Vietnamese constituency in that race. So she's perfectly capable of pulling that off. But that'll be a close one to watch. In fact, they're all going to be pretty close to watch, I suspect, except the next one, which is District 9, next slide, in which there's one candidate, and that's the incumbent Pam Foley. She's up for re-election. No one has pulled papers to run against her or announced or even been rumored to run against her. Filing closes on March 11th. So it's not long, and it's pretty late for somebody to get into the running. Pam raised $49 million in December, so that's pretty good base. She'll be continuing fundraising now, and we'll see if anybody emerges to oppose her, but I don't think that's going to happen. So we'll have at least one incumbent reelected, the second one, Maya Esparza, likely reelected, and then 3 open seats. And again, the winners of these seats can shift the balance on the council. The Business Political Action Committee, the business community, probably has their best opportunities in District 5 with Rolando Bonilla, maybe in District 7, but they've got an uphill battle to hold on to the 5 votes they've got on the council and to build on that. For the Labor community, for the Democratic Party, their best opportunity as a pickup is District 1, where I think Rosemary Kamei is going to be a leading candidate. I want to talk quickly about some other major players in these races. Next slide, please.
Terry, before you do, can I just throw
Okay.
something out there? One of the things that's really important for folks to understand is like each of these candidates have extensive voting records. A lot of them, those that have been in office. So like the candidates that are running for mayor, with the exception of Councilmember Mahan, they actually have a lot of things to pick over and be able to look at what's happening. And then also when people are making their decisions, when you look at some of the incumbents that are running, like Maya has a contested race. Everyone has these different types of priorities. So it's important for us to kind of look at and parse some of the issues, not just who's backing them. One thing that we have, I'm throwing this into the chat, is that at Sacred Heart Community Service, we have action committees that work on different policy issues, and our leaders have actually started to have pulled together a report card on the voting records on several major issues like renter protections, affordable housing policy, land use and funding wages and worker protections, the issue around hosting transitional housing, issues around police reform and immigration. And so there are grades for each of these. So people would like to learn more about how some of these folks have actually been voting that are currently in office, but that presents both opportunities and challenges to be able to assess, like, where are people going to be on these various issues. And it'll be very telling to see where their energy is right now, because like we were mentioning earlier, some of the candidates, including some of the mayoral candidates, have already lined up and said, well, we have this position on SB 9 where we don't support it. We have got three of the four major candidates that have said that they're not supportive. One of them has said that that's something that we should move forward with, and it's a helpful thing. And also where people stand on issues around homelessness and attacking the status quo of what's actually happening. Everyone is attacking the status quo around homelessness, but some people are saying that we need to be taking different types of action. So it's really important to pay attention to that, and that will play out not only the council races, but when we get to areas of the Board of Supervisors and where the money is coming, because money coming from either labor or business, it's not necessarily talking about labor or business issues. They're talking about these other issues that are trying to create those wedges and get people to be excited to actually motivate. Why are there multiple entities that are going to be pouring money and talking about issues around homelessness that aren't about homelessness? It's because that's where they think the voter electorate is going to be and where they're going to be able to press their advantage when in office.
Good point, John. Check out those Sacred Heart grades, because they're telling regarding the candidates who have been serving on the city council. Let's go to the next slide. And Poncho mentioned money and the money being spent on issues that aren't necessarily representative of the sources of the money. One big source this time around is going to be Mayor Sam Liccardo's political action committee called Common Good Silicon Valley. He has over $400,000 on hand. He has over $400,000 on hand. That's a lot of money. I think he's likely to support Matt Mahan for mayor, and also surely a slate of council members. So the mayor's leaving office, but he wants to continue some level of influence by helping us choose candidates for these various offices. But he's just one of the political action committees. His is just one of the political action committees that's active in this election. Go on to the next slide, please. And here are some of the other political action committees. Liccardo's is for Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee. The Chamber of Commerce, as a formal organization, isn't endorsing or running a political action committee at all this year, because they got in such trouble last time with racist campaign postings. But there is a group of business people who formed the Silicon Valley Business Political Action Committee, and they've raised significant funds. They have $122,000 on hand. They'll probably raise 4 times that much for these races ultimately. In 2020, the chamber spent almost $600,000 on city council races. Again, that's just city council races, no mayor's race. So I think we can expect significant independent expenditures from the Business Political Action Committee. The South Bay Labor Council has the Committee on Political Education, that's its PAC, has $112,000 on hand. They spent $430,000 last time. So they'll spend significantly, as will individual unions, especially those that include public employees. It matters very much to them who their elected bosses are going to be. The California Apartment Association is another major investor. Last time there was a political action committee called Innovation for Everyone that Carl Guardino, formerly of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, operated, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. They aren't, to my knowledge, active yet this year, but they could be. So we want to watch what these political action committees are doing and what they're spending money on. And as Poncho said, what messages they're purveying, and do they actually have anything to do with who they are, or are they using wedge issues? And Poncho, I think you're going to mention some of the advocacy organizations now that aren't necessarily big money donors, but are players in all this.
Yeah, many organizations many of our community-based organizations have the 501c3 status as organizations, as charitable like purposes. There's a different form of organization called a 501c4, which is an advocacy purpose, which has a different type of designation. So donations to them are not tax deductible in the same way, but they're able to exercise influence. But a number of these organizations are affiliated with nonprofits or nonprofit community in different ways. And so, for example, Planned Parenthood has a 501c4. Other advocacy groups have developed their own, including SB at Home and SV Rising, Silicon Valley Rising. There are different groups and conglomerations that have been able to kind of work with them. Some of them are affiliated with labor, some of them are affiliated with different advocacy models. And largely what we're hearing right now is that rather than running campaigns specifically on candidates or issues, some of them are going to be having candidate forums and other types of things, and being able to be in a position to highlight the certain stances of different elected leaders. So it's something to pay attention to. It's unclear whether they're going to be jumping into races and doing independent expenditures on behalf of candidates or not. Generally, their work is to actually just inform the public about the pluses and minuses of various candidates. But when we get into it, the political action committees is where a lot of the action is happening. And Terry, the only thing I'd add to what you were sharing is, like, when you look at the business chamber and you look at what Mayor Liccardo's political action committee is doing, they're actually sourcing from a lot of the same money, the same oftentimes development interests, oftentimes not just commercial development interests, but oftentimes housing developers have been funding both sides of the political equation for a very long time in order to kind of keep, hedging their bets. And so you're seeing a conglomeration of a lot of those resources coming into not only candidates' coffers, but into these political action committees. So it's very telling to see what's going to happen, follow the money, and it tells you what is actually going on with it. But again, the main issues that they've been talking about have not been about are we building more commercial developments? Are we doing that? That's where the money is flowing, and those are really important and lucrative decisions on their part.
Okay. And one more thing about city, we're going to be considering some charter changes, but the first one that'll be on the ballot is changing the date of mayoral elections. Right now we elect mayors in non-presidential election years like this one. And the proposal is to change the election of mayor to the years in which we elect presidents. The reason is voter turnout is significantly higher in presidential election years. Can be even double what it is in gubernatorial or midterm elections, but typically it's at least 30% higher. So one goal is having more people participate in choosing who the mayor is. But another goal is actually changing the outcome of mayoral elections, because when turnout is higher, it's a different electorate, particularly working people, minorities, BIPOC folks, and young people are more likely to vote. Those are more liberal constituencies, and that could shift an outcome. So if we went back to the race between Liccardo and Cortese, which Liccardo won by less than 3,000 votes, if that had been held in a presidential year, my prediction is Cortese would have won, because there would have been a bigger vote on the east side where his core constituency was. So changing the election date does enhance turnout, but it can also change the results. The Charter Revision Commission also recommended a variety of other charter changes. The council is going to study them and think about them. One of them is do we have a next slide on this? Not sure we do. Yeah, we do. One of them is for non-citizens to be able to vote in San Jose local elections. Non-citizens are able to vote in some school board and some city elections around the country. And so San Jose council members Arenas and Carrasco proposed this, and the council voted 10-1, Dev Davis dissenting, 10-1 to study the issue. So this could come to a ballot. It won't come to a ballot before November. The only charter change on the ballot for June will be election dates. And with that, next slide.
Well, actually, before we jump into that, one last comment I'll just make around what happened. There was a lot of community-based organization, nonprofit power that came in when the city was originally talking about making some of these charter changes, and there was an effort to say we're going to separate the timing of elections, and then but also included in one of the proposals was the idea of giving strong mayoral powers, and because of some mobilization and effort and voice of community-based organizations, they said, no, we need to have a full-on charter review commission. And that came up with a whole slew of things like Terry, you were saying, around equity became a real focus. Police accountability was one of the areas of focus. And then conversations around non-citizen voting, expanding voting rights, and those kind of things came to the fore because there were voices like you all that were involved in that process, helping to bring voice to that. So we should not underestimate how much influence that we can have when we're actually involved in these things. And so these are very consequential potential changes that could happen to our electorate and to the choices moving forward. Let's go to the county now. So the County Board of Supervisors, this is a very, very consequential race. And what we have here is a big change happened when it came to the redistricting process that I mentioned before. Specifically, there was an effort on the part of organized labor and some civil rights allies to be able to provide district maps and feedback in terms of how redistricting should happen, and included a pretty significant change to the composition of where some of the folks that are currently on the Board of Supervisors, currently represent, but also the districts, where some districts for an open seat, specifically District 1, which was changed to not only include, to not only just be parts of like Los Gatos and South County, but to actually change that to move parts of west and southwest Santa Clara County to connect them up with the northern part of the county. And so Palo Alto and those areas all became combined as a community of interest. And then South San Jose and a big chunk of South San Jose and South County became combined in a new District 1 race. The impact of that change meant that one of the couple of the leading fundraisers for this particular race were both heavily impacted. And so specifically Johnny Camus was actually his home was actually moved out of what was in that district, and he chose to move into that district. And then there was also another candidate that actually decided not to actually move his family to be part of that district, and he was one of the larger fundraisers for it. And so what we're looking at now is Johnny Camus, former San Jose City Council member, moved into the district, and we also have another strong fundraiser. It was Claudia Rossi, but we also had Rich Constantine, who is the mayor of Morgan Hill, Danelle Fedor, who previously served as the chief of staff for Pierluigi Oliverio, and has worked for other elected officials and involved in various things, is also in the race. But Sylvia Arenas, a current South San Jose city council member, has announced that she's going to be part of this race. And so it is very, very in flux. And for a lot of us that are working in the nonprofit community, this is one of the most consequential district elections that we're actually facing right now. The way that the variety of issues that are being touched, who has been representing this area could make a huge difference on lots of changes that are happening around health and mental health, other types of issues. So just to emphasize, Claudia Rossi, who's currently on I believe on the County Board of Education, has been an education advocate, lives in South County, as a registered nurse herself, has declared like what she really cares about are issues related to health and making sure that we're able to expand services and make sure that South County is deeply represented. Johnny Camus has been oftentimes, without, I'm going to walk a little line here, which is that I'm not endorsing any particular candidate in this race or involved in that. But we've actually seen Johnny has not been on the side of issues around things around affordable housing, tenant rights, around issues around homelessness, and has actually been very vocal at trying to limit the voice and representation of nonprofits. He's thrown up trial balloons about having nonprofits have to register as lobbyists and trying to put some limitations around that. And so it's very interesting to see where this race goes. And even though he has had to move into the district, what kind of support he will get. Well, you have folks like Sylvia Arenas, who again jumped into the race when the districts were redrawn, and has been very much involved in a number of different issues, such as domestic violence and intervention kind of programs. Gender-based violence, other types of things have been things that she's really focused in on from an economic development perspective, but also it's going to be a huge challenge to raise enough money, to actually play a significant role, especially when you're new to an area of the county, especially South County, that tends to be a little bit parochial in terms of that. And so Rich Constantine has been active in the labor movement, firefighter, I believe, and certainly has deep roots, obviously, with Morgan Hill as the mayor of Morgan Hill. So some very interesting dimensions of this particular race. Anything you would add, Terry?
No, you're right. It's going to be very competitive. It'll be really interesting to watch and see what happens with labor endorsement and with Democratic Party endorsement. Those three candidates across the top, Arenas, Constantine, Rossi, all have a shot at those endorsements, and we'll be fighting for them, and those can make a big difference in that race. And it is a key seat. Remember, there are only 5 members of the County Board of Supervisors, so this is 20%, really important seat.
So next slide. So the one of the things that's also very interesting is seeing Susan Ellenberg, who is running again for District 4, is actually has no opposition, has developed a pretty good sized war chest right now in terms of that could be fending off challengers, and has actually stuck her neck out on a number of really important issues. So it'll be seeing if anyone files, but it looks like she's got a clear path moving forward.
She's been racking up the endorsements too.
Yeah. And so next slide, the sheriff's race. Okay, this one is going to be interesting. If people don't know, our current sheriff, Lori Smith, is facing a lot of political hot water, investigations up the wazoo, and she's been embattled for a number of years because of conditions at the jail and other allegations that have happened that have been well documented around potential corruption and other types of things. I'm not saying she's corrupt, but I'm just saying that some people have accused that of her, including some of the candidates have run against her in the past, and some of the organizations that have been doing so. And so the biggest fundraiser in the race so far has been Kevin Jensen, who has received a bunch of money and support from the Deputy Sheriff's Union. They want to see staffing levels go up. They want to see a lot more investment in what's happening in that department. We also have Christian Nagaye, who is currently also a deputy in the department, and another strong potential candidate is Robert Johnson, who is the current police chief for the city of Palo Alto. So that's a really thing. There's some other relevant articles there, but we have not seen whether Lori Sheriff Smith is actually going to put her hat into the ring this year. We haven't heard anything definitive around that. All right, next slide. The DA's race. This is another very interesting one where we actually have, for the first time in some time, there's actually a significant, if not an equal par challenger to the incumbent. So DA Jeff Rosen has been racking up a lot of endorsements and has support and money. But what's interesting is there are a couple of really strong candidates, including Zahed Khan, who has been who's actually been raising a fair amount of money, and currently his role is he's a public defender, and he's actually made a lot of traction with a number of folks that are looking at how do we do some really significant reforms to our carceral system. So he's played a big role in pushing that, and he's raised a good amount of money. And we have Daniel Chung, who is actually a former DA who has actually sued Jeff Rosen over and the lawsuit was around that he had violated Chung's freedom of speech by disciplining and demoting him after he wrote an opinion piece complaining about the treatment of Asian American crime victims. So this one's a pretty exciting, interesting race, and often hard to see how someone gets dislodged, from a position like this. Anything you would add, Terry?
No, this is a good one to watch. Rosen's pretty strong, raised a ton of money, racked up a ton of endorsements. So it'll be tough, but I think he has some credible challengers.
So I think that's the main stuff. I don't know if we have time for questions, but
You maybe have like 2 minutes, because I think Dana can wrap up in 2 minutes.
any burning question right now?
Incredibly well timed, guys.
Well, good. Just a piece of advice. If you're working in a nonprofit and you have issues that you're concerned about that are affected by city and county, go to some of these candidate forums, not just so you can learn about the candidates, but so you can ask them questions. Unlike us, do ask them questions that get them to pay attention to the issues you're concerned about and hear where they are on these. Find out if they actually know anything, because a lot of these folks probably don't know an awful lot about what you're doing. So take it as an educational opportunity. Take it as an opportunity to sort of lobby them and get them to pay attention to the stuff you're concerned about.
And just one big shout out, there's going to be, SVCN is going to be doing candidate forums with many different nonprofit leaders. Sacred Heart is also going to have a candidate forum probably in early May. And so it's a great opportunity to be able to learn more about what they have to say from our perspective, the perspective of our constituents, and feel free to make your voice known in lots of ways. Get involved in these campaigns, make a difference in them, because we're not precluded from being involved, and they do affect our lives and those of our communities.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Terry and Poncho, for that really, really informative session.